our 7th consecutive interview at the IFA Congress with the man in the hot seat. That's how I like to call him. OECD Tax Policy Director Pascal Saint-Amans, among the most influential people in the world of not just tax but probably in the world of economics. Economics and taxation are intertwined. And to my right, Mr. Akhilesh Ranjan, CBDT member and a person who shaped India's international tax policy over the last 5 to 6 years, first as a competent authority, then as DG International Tax, now as CBDT member, has led India's charge on BEPS and really has been India's voice at the international tax stage. Maybe they work hand in hand to give us some part of BEPS. Pascal, before I come to digital economy, when we listen to OECD Secretary General Angel Gurria, to you today, 5 years of BEPS, multilateral instruments, 89 countries have signed up, 134 countries in the inclusive forum, 157 countries in global inclusive framework, 157 in the global forum. You almost declared mission accomplished and BEPS is on its way.
No, mission is never accomplished. I mean, we need to make sure that there is proper implementation throughout the countries, that we level the playing field, that developing countries get the capacities in place, that we take into account their view of the world, simplicity, administrability. So there is a lot still to do. What is true, though, is that we have put in place a mechanism where we have new rules, where tax avoidance is more difficult, even though there is much more progress to make. And we have put in place the governance to make sure that the next set of rules, which will be about addressing the tax challenges, the digitalization of the economy, are developed in an inclusive manner where you can have a deal between the US, between Japan, between the European countries, traditional OECD countries, and India, and China, and Brazil, and the others. So that's what we need to do. Mission is not accomplished, but we've done a lot, I think, on transparency in particular, on BEPS, significant progress, much more to do.
Which means he's saying that we are cruising at 38,000 feet above the ground. We will look at a soft landing now. Pascal, what for you have been apart from exchange of information, which has led to unearthing trillions of dollars worth of bank accounts in offshore countries or offshore havens, what apart from that has been really the big achievements for you in BEPS over the last 5 years? The big achievement?
Well, probably the inclusive framework, 134 members on an equal footing, is something big. We need to make sure that it's real, that it's not only lip service, or countries are there but they don't really participate. Actually, they're involved. I mean, I was in July in Delhi to meet Mr. Ranjan, Mr. Das, and also the finance minister and others to pre-negotiate stuff. So you can see that, it's not India comes late, as was a bit the case on BEPS, and India complained about that. So there is a new whole dynamic there, which is real. So that's the first accomplishment. Second one, and it's very trivial, but it's all these people working together on real stuff. You have many working parties, you have tax administrations working together, you have hundreds of tax administrators meeting at the OECD, sharing their views, sharing information, sharing practices, knowing each other, working with each other. And I think this is absolutely fundamental if we want to improve tax certainty, if we want to improve trust between the tax administrations. In yesterday's world, you wouldn't know as a tax administrator of a country who was your interlocutor. You would send a letter and not know who you're talking to. Now people know each other. They work together. That's why we have initiatives such as ICAP, International Compliance Assurance Program. That's why we have initiatives such as
Tax
joint
Inspectors
audits,
Without Borders.
Tax Inspectors Without Borders. Countries work together. That's another big achievement. Last, of course, I may have started with that, change of rules. I mean, we no longer have the OECD rules as they used to be without any change. They have been impacted seriously by the BEPS program. So I think incremental change, but significantly improved.
But not incremental. I think you used the word, and so did Mr. Gurria, sea change, big bang. But we'll come to the sea changes that you've been talking about, especially digitalization economy. We'll also play back some of the things that Pascal said 6 years back at Copenhagen. They've been proven prescient. Akhilesh, sir, what for you has been the best experience, and where does India stand in relation to BEPS?
I think it's been a marvelous experience. It's something I must compliment Pascal here. It's entirely because of him, I think, really. I really mean that. Because, I mean, yes, the picture that we had of OECD earlier is not valid any longer. It's a truly inclusive process. It's truly a process where people are able to air their views, and we are finding solutions. we have found several solutions. The BEPS project, I think, may have not touched on some aspects, as Pascal said today, but then it has done a hell of a lot. I mean, there are so many
Especially
areas.
on thing tax avoidance
Yes, of course. Yes,
and
of course.
permanent establishment, CBCR.
So many things. The multilateral instrument, I think, is a fantastic achievement. Nobody could have thought of such a thing. And we are managing to change treaty relationships just by ratifying the MLI. That's something great. That's very great. So I am very happy with the way things have progressed, and I'm very confident that we will move on in this direction for the time to come.
Yeah, Pascal, on the digital economy, or what you call the tax challenges of digitalization, I think you all went halfway today. You talked about what could potentially be the approach, the scope of work, the program of work. How do you plan to get everyone on board? And then you had the US representative, albeit in his personal capacity, talking of the red lines, possible red lines that the US is looking at. As a man in the hot seat, this is not easy to balance the interest of the developed countries, the countries where these big tech giants are currently being taxed, and the developing countries which want a portion of it. All of it led to a lot of discussion on the residual split method. That almost was the focus of the panel, which was a new learning for many. Tell our viewers, what exactly they should be expecting, Pascal, on this front.
Well, we should be looking at what we will publish in a month's time. So I cannot say much more at this point in time. But clearly, you've said it, we have a conversation on how you could allocate residual profit to the market jurisdictions while increasing certainty. We have these two elements which are key. And India has made a proposal, the significant economic presence, which has its limitation. The scope is not that far, and what we think is that the scope should be much broader. So we're more Indian than the Indians on that one, because we think the change should be bigger in a sense. There are differences. We're talking about residual profit to be allocated. The significant economic presence talk about routine profit as well, but we need to work on the numbers, see how they work, and so I should say, and not only in response to the nice words by Akhilesh, but India is a leading thinker in this area. Your proposals are extremely important, and not only by India, by the G24, but the delegates, Akhilesh Ranjan at his time on BEPS, now as member of the board, Rashmi Das, they're listened by their partners as key people in terms of quality of the input, of the thinking. So you can see that you have a complex conversation, because it's not, as per your remark, only US developed countries versus developing countries. That's much more complex than that. You have China, which is probably closer to the US or what the US was 10 years ago because of the new features of the economy in China. You have India, which indeed has also, I think, taken into account that the global governance has changed and that their voice is heard, so that means a good engagement. You have European countries, which are in an extremely interesting place, because European countries are, in a large part, developing digital countries. And they understand what it is to be a developing country. So that also changes the dynamic. So all the conditions are gathered.
So what in
for
brief,
a
Pascal,
real conversation, which will take place in the coming months at the OECD.
in brief, what are the two pillars that you discussed today? In brief, what are those two
Well,
pillars?
the solution should be based on two pillars. One is new nexus to catch business models that the current permanent establishment doesn't catch. Two, still in pillar one, nexus and profit allocation. Reallocating more profit to the market jurisdictions. How? Please, stay tuned. The second pillar is about a global minimum tax, multilateralization of GILTI, basically. GILTI is the US provision providing for a minimum tax. If the profit of American companies abroad is taxed at an effective rate, which is below 13.125, I think, percent, then the US will take the difference. And this is what other countries are working on, with another rule which would complement this, which would be an under-tax payment rule, so that it works both ways. So this is what we're working on, and the coming months again will be critical.
As one panelist said, US is exporting a guilty. We'll come back to Pascal for one final take on the digital economy. Akhilesh, I wouldn't want you to let out India's stand on this. Where do we stand? We have the equalization levy. We've legislated significant economic presence presence. Yet, you heard a contrarian view today, saying that from the US representative, you need better administrability of taxes in developing countries, that they too have trade barriers which they can enforce in response to unilateral actions, and if multilateral solution by OECD fails, though they were willing to give OECD a fair shot at the cherry to develop a multilateral solution. You heard a contrarian view as well, saying that you cannot, we would be possibly willing to allocate a fraction of the residual profit to market jurisdictions. A completely contrarian view.
No, I wouldn't call it contrarian. That's something which is expected. Yes, it's expected. When we made a proposal, we didn't think that it will sail through. Obviously, there are issues there. Obviously, there are limitations to what we are proposing. There are broader issues to be considered, as Pascal just mentioned. I think we had started off on a fairly narrow scope. I don't think it's contrarian. We are also not insistent on carrying on with the unilateral measures, and we have always said that these are interim measures. We are hoping for a consensus to develop. We have been saying that there should be a consensus for the last many years. And as soon as we can get a reasonable consensus, I think unilateral measures may not be required at all.
What would be the contour? I mean, what would satisfy us as a market jurisdiction? I'm not saying give me a formula, but what could be the contour? What would satisfy us? What would be our fair share, India's fair share?
Well, I mean, we are talking of, we are saying that we want some sort of attribution rules which can take into account the market forces, which may transcend beyond just marketing intangibles. So now, how do we do that? That's a matter of discussion, and that will go on. But right now, I think as long as we can arrive at an agreement where there is a robust and a viable way of profit allocation, I think that will be fine with us. I mean, we have to work towards that. So right now, I mean, very difficult to say what exactly, but of course we do think that it has to be more of a formulaic approach. I mean, we have always been saying that arm's length. If we keep sticking to arm's length, then maybe it will be all the more difficult to find solutions. So, there is already thinking which is going beyond the arm's length principle. And that gives us hope that we can arrive at some sort of a mutually...
So some trivia for you. When I interviewed Pascal 6 years ago, he told me that arm's length and all, these are all academic questions. But today I've seen Pascal go as far, on that topic as I've seen probably in 6 years, admitting and acknowledging that there are certain things that possibly where the expectation was a bit more. On BEPS, and when it comes to the ALP discussions, arm's length principle standard, Pascal, the one approach was that one talked about was overlaying of a new solution or the new nexus with the arm's length principle. Someone possibly commented, one of the senior advocates, legal luminaries, that are you trying to keep it alive on oxygen? What is the fate of arm's length principle? I mean, especially in the contours of the digitalization challenges that you're saying. That it is last year the sentence which made the headline was the arm's length principle is under strain, especially when guilty and beat and everything came around. Today, when we are talking of a new nexus rule, Pascal, what does it mean for the arm's length principle? And when I did the interview with you 6 years ago, you said that we are looking to address tax issues for the next 20 years. Someone joked that OECD is the new World Tax Organization. So he is the chief.
Many things in your questions, and we need to separate them out.
New nexus rule.
We need to separate them out. Nexus is about catching business models that existing rules wouldn't allow tax administrations to catch. Nothing to do with the profit allocation.
Perfect.
So nexus, I think, is pretty clear, the sense of direction. Now, profit allocation, is the arm's length dead or not? I think it's not relevant still. You have a rule, nobody's talking about dropping it, not even India. We recognize that there are limitations. It's under strain because the digitalization of the economy. That's what Chip Harter from the US said at the panel today. The question is, how do we fix this without throwing the baby with the bathwater? So without getting into a theoretical debate, because then we'll be there in 20 years' time. How can we introduce incremental changes which will fix where the problem is, which is with the IP, with the intangible, where you have the big residual profit? Is the arm's length fit for purpose there? Probably not. Can it be fixed? Probably yes, by introducing some new elements which go beyond it, and that's what we're working on in a very pragmatic manner. So that's the sense of direction, and I think we're making significant progress with, maybe that's the last words from me, in an environment where multilateralism is in crisis on tax, there is room for progress. We heard it from the US today. The US delegate said, if we don't make progress, the system may collapse.
He said it's a perilous moment.
The counterfactual is about defensive measures or unilateral measures everywhere in the world. Let's avoid that. It's the interest of everybody.
You're confident you'll have a solution next year this time, Pascal?
I hope so. If we don't have, we'll be in a very difficult situation. Yes.
Last word, the US representative Chipata said it's a perilous moment in tax history, testing the international consensus of the last 100 years. Your comment?
Well, yes, it is the case, and again, we have political support from the G20 to move ahead quickly. Let's use it.
Last word from Ranjan. Just hold on for a second. Last word from Sir.
No, certainly. I mean, we are at a crossroads actually, where it is going to be a fundamental shift in the way people look at international tax and the way tax rules are made. So I think we must not lose sight of the importance of the matter, and that's why countries must be willing to talk and discuss and find ways of reaching solutions. And it's extremely helpful to have the political support, as Pascal said, with the G20 backing all the efforts and wanting a solution. Actually, I think tax is becoming more and more political, of course, but then that's how it will have to be in this modern world, where the political consensus will have to drive the tax consensus.
Lesser disputes after 5 years, not more disputes, you think?
We would certainly. I'm very hopeful about that, and I think there are many ways of achieving that objective.
Lesser disputes, more certainty in 5 years, Pascal, possible?
If we're successful, yes. If we're not successful, much more uncertainty and many more disputes.
We wish Pascal and Mr. Ranjan all success. Thanks so much, gentlemen, for talking to us. That's all we have from day 3 at the London Congress.
Thank you.